Marissa sat by the window, watching the rain gently tap against the glass. It was a quiet evening, the kind that invited contemplation. Her thoughts, as usual, drifted back to her young daughter, Lucy, who had been unusually silent since their recent move to the countryside. The little girl, barely 7, had always been full of energy and curiosity. But ever since they had arrived, Lucy had grown withdrawn, casting nervous glances toward the sprawling yard and the old willow tree that loomed at the edge of their property. One evening, as Marissa tucked Lucy into bed, she noticed the girl's eyes were wide with fear. "Mommy, the tree! It's not like other trees," Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible. "It whispers to me when I'm alone." Marissa, heart sinking, kissed her forehead and smiled. "Sweetheart, trees don't whisper. You're just letting your imagination run wild." But the unease in Lucy's eyes didn't ease, and Marissa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few days, Lucy refused to go near the tree, her tiny hand gripping Marissa's every time they passed it. The more Lucy tried to avoid it, the more curious Marissa became. One afternoon, while Lucy played inside with her toys, Marissa stood by the window, staring out at the willow. It seemed to stretch endlessly, its branches hanging like long, twisted fingers reaching down into the ground. Suddenly, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a shadow standing motionless beneath the tree. Shaking her head, Marissa quickly dismissed the thought. It was probably just a trick of the light. But the shadow, as fleeting as it was, lingered in her mind. There was something off about that tree, something sinister. That evening, as Marissa sat in her living room reading a book, she heard a soft knock on the door. She opened it to find Mrs. Lambert, the elderly neighbor who lived 2 houses down. Mrs. Lambert was known for her sharp eyes and her love for gossip, and she had always been kind to Marissa. "Good evening, dear," Mrs. Lambert greeted, her face wrinkled with age but kind as ever. "I just thought I'd stop by and introduce myself properly. I've seen you around and wanted to make sure you and your little one are settling in, okay?" "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Lambert," Marissa replied. "We're doing well, just adjusting to the countryside." The older woman's eyes flickered briefly toward the window. "I see your daughter's taken a liking to the willow tree. It's an old thing, that one." Marissa raised an eyebrow. "Lucy's been avoiding it, actually. She's not quite sure about it." Mrs. Lambert's face tightened, and she lowered her voice. "That tree has a history, dear. It's been here long before I was born, and there's a reason no one dares to venture too close. Some say it's just superstition, but I know better. You should keep your daughter away from it, especially at night. I've seen things near that tree." Marissa, though slightly unnerved, chuckled awkwardly. "You mean like the way the wind makes it look so eerie? I'll make sure Lucy stays clear of it." Mrs. Lambert nodded, but her gaze remained serious. "There's more to that tree than you know. Be careful, Marissa." As Mrs. Lambert walked away, Marissa stood at the door, her mind racing. What did she mean by that? Could there be something to Lucy's fears after all? Maybe the willow wasn't just a tree, but what could it be? A storm of questions swirled in her mind, but she had no answers. The next few days were filled with an unsettling quiet. Marissa made sure to keep Lucy inside, offering distractions from the mysterious tree outside. But the weight of her daughter's fear grew heavier each day. Lucy's whispers, her trembling hand on Marissa's sleeve as they neared the window, gnawed at Marissa's heart. One evening after dinner, Marissa sat in the living room when she heard a faint, distant sound. It was soft at first, almost like a rustling of leaves. But then it grew louder, sharper, almost like someone was tapping on the window. She stood up, heart pounding, and moved toward the source of the noise. She gasped when she saw it, a figure standing beneath the willow tree, cloaked in darkness. Marissa's breath caught in her throat. The figure seemed to be waiting, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Fear flooded her chest, but then something inside her stirred. She couldn't let this continue. She had to know what was happening. With trembling hands, Marissa grabbed her flashlight and went outside. The rain had stopped, and the night was eerily still. The only sound was the faint rustling of the willow's branches, almost as if they were whispering. As Marissa approached the tree, the figure slowly turned. She froze, her pulse racing, as the figure stepped forward. An elderly man, hunched over with age, his eyes hollow and haunted. "You shouldn't be here," the man rasped, his voice low and gravely. "She'll come for you next." Marissa took a step back. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do you mean? Who's coming?" The man's eyes flickered to the tree, and then back to her. "I was once like you, young and full of life, but I ignored the warnings. The tree, it takes, you know. It doesn't let go once it has you." Suddenly, Marissa understood. The tree was not just a tree. It was a vessel, a place of darkness. Something had happened here long ago, something that bound people to the land, taking their souls in exchange for some twisted form of eternity. Her heart raced as she realized what needed to be done. She couldn't let Lucy's fear continue. She couldn't let this man's warnings become their reality. "Get away from the tree," Marissa demanded, her voice steadying as her maternal instincts took over. "Tell me what happened. Who did this? Who is taking people?" The old man's face twisted in anguish. "She was my wife. She was beautiful. But she got too close. Now she lives within the tree, waiting for the next soul to take." Marissa's mind raced. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about spirits bound to cursed places. The willow was a prison, but Marissa knew what she had to do. She couldn't let Lucy fall victim to this. She had to end it. "Stay away from my daughter," Marissa whispered, her voice cold with resolve. "You won't take anyone else?" The man's eyes widened, and he disappeared into the shadows with a soft cry, leaving Marissa standing before the tree. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she didn't hesitate. She turned, gathering every ounce of courage, and walked inside. Lucy's fear would not have to grow anymore. She would protect her, and she would end this haunting. The next day, Marissa visited the local historian, an elderly woman who had lived in the village her entire life. After hours of conversation, Marissa learned the truth. The willow tree had once been the home of a tragic love story with a betrayal that bound a woman's spirit to the land, forever seeking vengeance. It was time to put an end to the curse, to set the spirit free. With determination, Marissa returned to the tree that evening, ready to do whatever it took to protect her daughter. The spirits of the past would no longer haunt the living. In the days that followed, Lucy's fears vanished. The whispers, the dark figure, gone. The willow tree no longer loomed ominously in the yard. And for the first time, Lucy was able to play freely in the yard, her laughter ringing through the air. Marissa had stood strong, faced the darkness head-on, and had set them both free. The power of her love for her daughter had driven her to protect their future, even at the cost of confronting the supernatural. And in doing so, she had transformed fear into peace and found an unbreakable strength in herself. The lesson was clear. With patience, compassion, and the courage to face the unknown, Marissa had ensured that her family would no longer live in fear. She had embraced her responsibility as a protector, a mother, and a light in the darkest of times.